She caught the billionaire CEO with her stepsister. 2 years later, he saw her with twins. Natalie Brooks stood frozen in the doorway of Grayson Cole's penthouse office, her world collapsing around her. There, on the sleek leather couch where they had once planned their future together, her husband of 3 years was entangled with her stepsister, Vanessa. Natalie! Grayson jerked away, his usually composed face contorting with shock. This isn't. How long? Natalie asked, her voice eerily calm despite the earthquake happening inside her. Vanessa at least had the grace to look uncomfortable, smoothing her skirt as she stepped away from Grayson. Nat, this isn't what you think. How long? Each word was carved from ice. 3 months, Grayson admitted, his face ashen. Natalie, please, we need to talk about this. 3 months. The entire time she had been worrying about their marriage, missing him, planning their anniversary surprise, he had been with her stepsister. The 2 people she trusted most in the world had been lying to her face, making her doubt her own perceptions. Without another word, Natalie turned and walked out, ignoring Grayson's calls, Vanessa's tearful explanations. In the elevator, in the taxi, in the apartment they had shared for 3 years, she moved with mechanical precision, packing essentials, withdrawing cash, arranging for a rental car. By nightfall, she was gone, driving west with no destination in mind except away. Away from the betrayal, away from the humiliation, away from the life she had believed in so completely. What she didn't know, couldn't know, as she crossed state lines in the dark, was that she wasn't leaving alone. The child she and Grayson had been trying for, the family they had planned to build, was already beginning. A new life, taking form inside her even as her marriage crumbled to dust. 2 years would pass before Grayson Cole discovered what he had truly lost that day. 2 years before he would stand face to face with Natalie again and see his son for the first time. 2 years before the real battle would begin. Have you ever discovered that the 2 people you trusted most in the world were betraying you behind your back? That gut-wrenching moment when everything you believed about your life suddenly reveals itself as a carefully constructed lie? If you've ever experienced that kind of betrayal, hit that like button right now. And if you believe that some actions have consequences that can never be undone, subscribe to Timeless Love Tales with Mr. Harrison for more stories that explore the complex terrain of love, betrayal, and redemption. I'm Mr. Harrison, and today I'm sharing the remarkable story of how one woman's discovery of her husband's infidelity led to a chain of events that would change multiple lives forever. It's a tale of betrayal and new beginnings, of secrets kept and truths revealed, and ultimately, of the price we pay for the choices we make. Natalie Brooks never intended to fall in love with Grayson Cole. When she first encountered the billionaire CEO at a charity gala in Manhattan, she had dismissed him as another entitled businessman. Handsome, certainly, with his sharp gray eyes and commanding presence, but not someone who would understand her world. At 26, Natalie was focused on building her career as an environmental scientist, passionate about conservation and suspicious of corporate power. Grayson Cole, with his vast real estate empire and reputation for ruthless business tactics, represented everything she distrusted. The ballroom of the Metropolitan Museum of Art glittered with wealth and privilege that evening. Crystal chandeliers cast a golden glow over New York's elite as they raised champagne flutes to ocean conservation, while wearing jewelry that cost more than most researchers' annual salaries. Natalie had only attended because her research team had received recognition from the foundation hosting the event. After an hour of stilted small talk and sidelong glances at her off-the-rack gown, she had escaped to a balcony overlooking the city lights, seeking a moment of solitude. "You haven't touched your champagne," a deep voice observed from behind her. Natalie turned to find Grayson Cole standing in the doorway, his tall frame silhouetted against the light from the ballroom. She recognized him immediately from the business magazines her stepfather read religiously. In person, he was even more imposing than his photograph suggested. "I'm not much of a drinker," she replied, not bothering to hide her disinterest. "Neither am I," he admitted, stepping onto the balcony. "These events are more about appearances than enjoyment." Something in his tone, a hint of weariness, perhaps, or unexpected honesty, made her look at him more closely. Then why attend? The foundation does good work, he said, nodding toward the ballroom. And occasionally, you meet someone interesting. His gaze held hers, direct and unabashed, and Natalie felt an unexpected flutter of awareness. Up close, Grayson Cole was more compelling than his magazine photos suggested. The strong line of his jaw softened by the slight curve of his mouth, the intensity in his eyes balanced by tiny laugh lines at the corners. I'm not interesting, she said firmly. Just a scientist who feels out of place in designer dresses and borrowed jewelry. That's precisely what makes you interesting, Ms. Brooks. He smiled then, transforming his serious face into something almost boyish. Everyone else here is playing a role they've rehearsed 1,000 times. You're refreshingly authentic. How do you know my name? I make it my business to know who's receiving recognition at events I sponsor. Your work on coastal ecosystem restoration is impressive. Despite her reservations, Natalie found herself drawn into conversation with him. Grayson proved surprisingly knowledgeable about environmental issues, asking thoughtful questions about her research that went beyond polite small talk. As the evening progressed, they moved from environmental science to literature, from childhood memories to future aspirations, the initial awkwardness melting away into genuine connection. May I call you? He asked as the gala wound down, his card extended between long fingers. Perhaps we could continue this conversation over dinner. Natalie hesitated, all her instincts warning against entanglement with someone from his world. But curiosity won out over caution. I'd like that, she said, accepting his card and offering her number in return. She expected him to wait the customary 3 days before calling. Instead, her phone rang the very next morning as she was preparing for work. Too soon, Grayson asked when she answered, a smile evident in his voice. Unexpected, she replied honestly. I found that when something interests me, there's little point in artificial delay. Are you free tomorrow evening? Their first date was at a small, family-owned Italian restaurant in the village, not the Michelin-starred establishment she had anticipated. Grayson arrived in a simple button-down shirt rather than a suit, having clearly made an effort to create an environment where she might feel comfortable. It was the first of many surprises he would offer. Their courtship unfolded with an intensity that both thrilled and alarmed her. Grayson pursued her with the same focused determination that had built Cole Industries, sending thoughtful gifts related to their conversations, arranging dates that showed he was paying attention to her interests, calling exactly when he said he would. For a man whose schedule was planned months in advance, the time he made for her felt significant. You're different with him, observed Vanessa, Natalie's stepsister, over brunch 6 weeks after the gala. Vanessa was everything Natalie was not. Blonde, polished, socially adept, with the easy confidence of someone who had always belonged in privileged circles. Their parents' marriage when Natalie was 12 had brought this glamorous older stepsister into her life, a relationship that had evolved from initial wariness to genuine affection. Natalie stirred her coffee, considering this. He challenges me, makes me think about things differently. And the fact that he's gorgeous and worth billions doesn't hurt, Vanessa teased, her perfect eyebrows arching suggestively. That's actually the complicated part, Natalie admitted. His world is so different from mine. Sometimes I feel like we're speaking different languages. Vanessa reached across the table, squeezing her hand. Maybe that's good. You've always played it safe, Nat. Maybe it's time to step outside your comfort zone. The irony of that encouragement would haunt Natalie later. At the time, though, it reinforced her growing conviction that perhaps the attraction between her and Grayson wasn't just chemistry or novelty, but something worth exploring despite their differences. 3 months into their relationship, Grayson invited her to accompany him to Tokyo for a business trip. I'll be in meetings most days, he warned, but the evenings would be ours. And there's a marine conservation center I thought you might want to visit while I'm working. The thoughtfulness of the suggestion, finding a way to incorporate her interests into his business trip, tipped the scales. In Tokyo, their relationship deepened beyond the careful boundaries Natalie had maintained. Away from New York, away from their respective worlds, they found a connection that transcended their differences. Their hotel suite overlooked the glittering Tokyo skyline, the city a tapestry of lights stretching to the horizon. On their third night, after a dinner of exquisite sushi and sake, they stood on the balcony watching the neon-lit streets below. "I've never felt this way about anyone," Grayson confessed, his arms encircling her from behind. "You make me want to be better, Natalie, to build something meaningful, not just profitable." "I'm not trying to change you," she said, leaning into his embrace. "I know. That's precisely why you do." He turned her to face him, his expression more vulnerable than she had ever seen it. "I love you. I think I have since that first night on the balcony." The words hung between them, weighted with significance. Natalie had been careful with her heart, had built walls around it after watching her mother's devastating heartbreak when her father left. But in that moment, looking into Grayson's eyes, she made a choice. "I love you too," she whispered, and felt something shift inside her. A door opening to possibilities she had never allowed herself to imagine. They were married 6 months later in an intimate ceremony on Grayson's private island. Only close family and friends attended, including Vanessa, who served as Natalie's maid of honor, stunning in a pale blue gown that complemented her blonde beauty. The morning of the wedding, as they prepared in the master suite of the island's main house, Vanessa helped adjust Natalie's veil, her fingers deft and gentle. "You look radiant," she said, meeting Natalie's eyes in the mirror. "Grayson won't know what hit him. I still can't believe this is happening," Natalie admitted, a flutter of nerves and excitement in her stomach. "A year ago, I would have said a man like him was the last person I'd end up with. That's the beauty of life." Vanessa smiled, her blue eyes warm with affection. "It surprises you when you least expect it." The ceremony was simple but elegant, held on a cliff overlooking the turquoise waters of the Caribbean. As Natalie walked toward Grayson, his face illuminated with a joy she had never seen before, she felt a certainty that transcended her usual caution. This was right. This was where she belonged. If you've ever taken a chance on love despite all the reasons it shouldn't work, give this video a thumbs up. Sometimes the heart recognizes what the mind can't yet comprehend, and the greatest adventures begin when we step outside our comfort zones. The first year of marriage was a delicate balance of adjustment and discovery. Natalie continued her research work, refusing Grayson's offer to fund her own foundation. "I need to earn my accomplishments, not have them handed to me," she explained when he presented the proposal, complete with letterhead and mission statement. Grayson respected her independence but struggled sometimes to understand her reluctance to fully embrace the privileges his wealth provided. "You're my wife," he said one night after she declined to use the company jet for a research trip. "Using our resources isn't taking advantage. It's practical." "They're your resources," she corrected gently. "And I need to maintain my professional credibility. Showing up to field research in a private jet doesn't exactly align with environmental conservation values." These small tensions were balanced by profound moments of connection. Quiet evenings at home when Grayson would read scientific journals to better understand her work. Weekends when Natalie would listen attentively as he explained complex business strategies, both of them building bridges to each other's worlds. Their different backgrounds manifested in other ways too. Natalie remained close to her mother, a high school art teacher who had raised her alone after her father abandoned them when Natalie was 7. Later, when her mother remarried and Vanessa entered their lives, Natalie had gained not just a stepfather, but a sister who became her closest confidant despite their different personalities. Grayson, by contrast, rarely spoke of his family. His parents had died in a car accident when he was 19, leaving him to raise his younger brother while simultaneously taking over the struggling family business. That dual responsibility had shaped him profoundly, instilling both his legendary work ethic and his difficulty with vulnerability. "You never really had time to grieve," Natalie observed one night, after he'd shared rare memories of his parents. They were lying in bed, the Manhattan skyline glittering beyond their bedroom windows. Grayson's face was half in shadow, his profile sharp against the darkness. "There wasn't that luxury," he said simply. "Alexander needed stability, and the business was failing. I did what was necessary." and built an empire in the process. A shadow crossed his face. At a cost. Alexander resented me for years, felt I was trying to replace our father. And I missed most of his adolescence because I was working constantly. You did your best, Natalie said, touching his face gently. You were barely more than a child yourself. Perhaps, he acknowledged. But I've learned that intentions don't matter as much as impact. Something to remember if we ever have children of our own. The subject of children became more frequent in their conversations as they approached their second anniversary. Natalie, initially hesitant about motherhood given her career ambitions, found herself increasingly drawn to the idea of building a family with Grayson. You'd be an amazing father, she told him one morning as they watched their friend's toddler playing in the garden of their Hamptons home. Patient but firm, like you are with your junior executives. He laughed, pulling her close. I'm not sure managing a multinational corporation is quite the same as raising a child. No, she agreed. But the core qualities are similar. Consistency, fairness, the ability to see potential and nurture it. Something shifted in Grayson's expression. A softening, a vulnerability that still emerged rarely. With you as their mother, our children would have everything that matters. Your compassion, your integrity, your brilliant mind. They began trying for a baby that month, adding a new dimension of intimacy to their relationship. Natalie found herself dreaming of a child with Grayson's determined gray eyes and her own unruly dark curls. A perfect blend of them both. As their third anniversary approached, however, subtle changes began to appear in their carefully balanced life. Grayson was working longer hours, preoccupied with a major expansion into Asian markets. Natalie was deep in a crucial phase of her research, often returning home late from the lab. They were like ships passing in the night, connected by brief conversations and hasty kisses. The penthouse that had once felt like a sanctuary began to feel like a way station, a place where they both briefly paused before returning to their separate worlds. Natalie noticed the shift but told herself it was temporary, a natural ebb in the rhythm of any marriage. Still, she couldn't ignore the growing distance between them, the way Grayson seemed to look through her rather than at her when she spoke. I hardly see you anymore, she said one evening, when Grayson canceled their dinner plans for the third time that month. They stood in their expansive kitchen, the meal she had prepared growing cold on the counter between them. It's temporary, he assured her, already scrolling through emails on his phone. Once this deal closes, things will calm down. You said that last month, Natalie pointed out, trying to keep the hurt from her voice. And the month before. Grayson looked up then, seeming to truly see her for the first time in weeks. He set his phone down and crossed to her, taking her hands in his. You're right. I've been neglecting us. Let me make it up to you this weekend. No phones, no work, just us. But Saturday morning brought an emergency at the office, and by Sunday, they were back to their disconnected routine. If anything, Grayson became more distant, more absorbed in work. When he was home, he was often distracted, checking his phone constantly, disappearing into his office for urgent calls. Vanessa, who had recently moved to New York after a divorce, became Natalie's sounding board during this difficult period. They met regularly for lunch or coffee, their childhood bond strengthened by Vanessa's return to the city. All marriages go through phases, she reassured Natalie over lunch at their favorite bistro. Grayson's under enormous pressure with this expansion. I know, Natalie sighed, pushing her salad around her plate. I just miss him, the real him. Not this distracted workaholic who happens to sleep in my bed. Have you told him how you feel? I've tried. He listens, promises to do better, and then nothing changes. Vanessa reached across the table, squeezing her hand sympathetically. Men like Grayson are complicated. They compartmentalize. Maybe he needs a more dramatic reminder of what matters. Taking her stepsister's advice, Natalie planned a surprise weekend away, a return to Tokyo, where they had first declared their love. She arranged everything meticulously, coordinating with Grayson's assistant to clear his schedule, packing his favorite clothes, even booking the same hotel suite with its spectacular view. The trip was scheduled to coincide with their 3rd anniversary. Natalie planned to surprise him at his office, whisk him directly to the airport in a grand romantic gesture that would remind them both of what mattered beyond work and daily routines. The morning of the surprise, Natalie woke with a strange mixture of excitement and apprehension. Something felt off, a subtle disquiet she couldn't name. She dismissed it as nerves and focused on the final preparations, confirming the car service, double-checking their passports, making sure the champagne would be chilled and waiting in their suite upon arrival. She arrived at Cole Industries headquarters unannounced, excitement fluttering in her stomach as she took the private elevator to the executive floor. The receptionist greeted her warmly. She was still Mrs. Cole here, still accorded the deference due to the CEO's wife, despite her infrequent visits. "Is he in?" Natalie asked, nodding toward Grayson's office. "Yes, Mrs. Cole, but—" The receptionist hesitated, something flickering in her eyes that Natalie couldn't quite read. "He asked not to be disturbed." "It's all right," Natalie assured her with a smile. "I think he'll make an exception for me." Grayson's assistant was conspicuously absent from her desk. Part of the plan, Natalie assumed, to ensure the surprise wasn't spoiled. The hallway to his office was quiet, the thick carpet muffling her footsteps as she approached the heavy oak door. The door to his private office was slightly ajar. Natalie pushed it open quietly, a smile already forming on her lips. And then she saw them, Grayson and Vanessa, locked in an embrace that left no room for innocent interpretation. Her husband and her stepsister, betraying her in the most fundamental way possible. Vanessa's blonde hair spilled across Grayson's desk, his hands tangled in it as he kissed her with a passion Natalie hadn't seen from him in months. For one endless moment, Natalie stood frozen, her mind refusing to process what her eyes were seeing. Then Grayson looked up, his expression shifting from passion to shock in an instant. "Natalie!" He jerked away from Vanessa, but it was too late. The damage was done, the trust shattered irreparably. The confrontation that followed was brief but devastating. No dramatic screaming, no throwing of objects. Just the cold, precise questioning of a scientist gathering data on the destruction of something once thought indestructible. "How long?" Natalie had asked, her voice eerily calm despite the earthquake happening inside her. Vanessa at least had the grace to look uncomfortable, smoothing her skirt as she stepped away from Grayson. "Nat, this isn't what you think." "How long?" Each word was carved from ice. 3 months, Grayson admitted, his face ashen. "Natalie, please, we need to talk about this." 3 months. The entire time she had been worrying about their marriage, missing him, planning their anniversary surprise, he had been with her stepsister. The two people she trusted most in the world had been lying to her face, making her doubt her own perceptions. Without another word, Natalie turned and walked out, ignoring Grayson's calls, Vanessa's tearful explanations. In the elevator, in the taxi, in the apartment they had shared for 3 years, she moved with mechanical precision, packing essentials, withdrawing cash, arranging for a rental car. By nightfall, she was gone, driving west with no destination in mind except away. Away from the betrayal, away from the humiliation, away from the life she had believed in so completely. If you've ever had to walk away from something you thought would last forever, hit that like button. Sometimes the hardest decisions are the ones we make in moments of absolute clarity, when the path forward suddenly becomes unmistakable, even if it leads into the unknown. The first few days after Natalie left New York were a blur of highways and anonymous motel rooms. She drove without purpose, stopping when exhaustion demanded, eating when her body reminded her of the necessity, but otherwise existing in a state of suspended animation. The betrayal played on endless loop in her mind. Grayson and Vanessa, the two people she had trusted most, locked in an embrace that destroyed everything she had believed about her life. Her phone buzzed constantly with calls and messages from Grayson, from her mother, even from Vanessa. She ignored them all, eventually buying a prepaid phone and leaving her old one in a trash can at a rest stop in Ohio. She wasn't ready to talk to anyone, wasn't ready to hear explanations or apologies or pleas to return. On the 5th day, somewhere in the rolling hills of Kentucky, nausea hit her with unexpected force. She barely made it to the side of the road before emptying her stomach into a ditch. Food poisoning, she thought, remembering the questionable diner where she'd eaten breakfast. But when the nausea returned the next morning, and the morning after that, a different possibility began to take shape in her mind. In a small drugstore in a town whose name she wouldn't remember, Natalie bought a pregnancy test with cash, her hands trembling slightly as she handed the money to the clerk. In the grimy bathroom of a gas station, she waited the prescribed 3 minutes, watching the second hand of her watch tick with agonizing slowness. 2 lines. Positive. Pregnant. The irony wasn't lost on her. After months of trying, after temperature tracking and ovulation kits and carefully timed intimacy, she was pregnant now, when her marriage was in ruins. A child conceived in what she had believed was love, now growing inside her as she fled from betrayal. For the first time since leaving New York, Natalie cried. Not the quiet tears of shock or the hot tears of anger, but deep, wrenching sobs that seemed to come from the very core of her being. She cried for the life she had lost, for the trust that had been broken, for the child who would be born into this complicated mess of love and betrayal. When the tears finally subsided, Natalie looked at herself in the spotted mirror of the gas station bathroom. Her face was blotchy, her eyes swollen, but something had shifted in her expression. A determination, a resolve that hadn't been there before. "We'll be okay," she whispered, one hand resting on her still flat stomach. "Whatever happens, we'll figure it out together." That night, in a slightly better motel room than she'd been staying in, Natalie made a plan. She couldn't keep driving aimlessly. She needed stability, healthcare, a place to prepare for the baby. And she needed to be somewhere Grayson wouldn't easily find her. At least not until she had figured out what she wanted, what was best for her child. She remembered a small coastal town in Oregon where she had conducted research during graduate school. Pacific Grove was far from New York, both geographically and culturally, with a close-knit community and a slower pace of life. It had a decent hospital, affordable housing, and most importantly, no connections to her life with Grayson. 2 days later, she arrived in Pacific Grove, the ocean air a welcome change from the recycled atmosphere of her car. The town was much as she remembered it. Charming Victorian houses lining the streets near the water, small local businesses instead of chain stores, friendly faces that nodded hello to strangers. Natalie found a small furnished apartment above a bookstore, paid 3 months' rent in advance with cash, and introduced herself to the landlady as Natalie Brooks, reverting to her maiden name for the first time in 3 years. She claimed to be recently widowed, a lie that felt necessary to avoid questions about a missing husband. "Such a tragedy, losing your husband so young," clucked Mrs. Abernathy, the elderly landlady, as she handed over the keys. "But Pacific Grove is a healing place. The ocean has a way of washing away grief." If only it were that simple, Natalie thought, but she smiled and thanked the woman for her kindness. The next few weeks were a crash course in rebuilding a life from scratch. Natalie found a job at the local Marine Research Center, her credentials impressive enough to overcome her lack of recent references. She located an obstetrician who accepted her vague explanations about having recently moved and needing to transfer her care. She began creating the framework of a new existence, one day at a time. At her first ultrasound appointment, 12 weeks into her pregnancy, Natalie received another shock. The technician moved the wand over her slightly rounded belly, then paused, a smile spreading across her face. "Well, Mrs. Brooks, it looks like you're having twins." "Twins?" Natalie echoed, her voice faint with surprise. "Yes, see here?" The technician pointed to the screen. 2 separate amniotic sacs, 2 babies. Fraternal twins, most likely. Twins. 2 babies. Twice the responsibility, twice the joy, twice the connection to Grayson. Natalie felt a momentary panic, wondering if she could possibly manage 2 infants on her own. But as she watched the tiny forms on the screen, saw the flickering heartbeats of her children, determination replaced fear. "They're perfect," she whispered, tears filling her eyes. As her pregnancy progressed, Natalie settled into life in Pacific Grove. She made a few cautious friendships, particularly with Elena, a single mother who lived in the apartment next door. She prepared for the twins' arrival with methodical care, scouring thrift stores for baby equipment, reading everything she could find about twin pregnancies and newborn care. She thought often of Grayson during those months, wondering if he was looking for her, if he regretted his betrayal, if he would want to know about the babies. Sometimes, in the quiet darkness of night, she would allow herself to remember the good parts of their marriage. His laugh, the way he would read scientific journals to understand her work, the tenderness in his eyes when they had talked about having children. But then the image of him with Vanessa would intrude, and the wound would feel fresh again. How could she ever trust him after that? How could she expose her children to a father who had so easily betrayed their mother? To a world where wealth and power seemed to excuse any behavior. No, she decided. It was better this way. A clean break, a fresh start. Her children would know love and stability, even if they didn't have the material advantages Grayson's wealth could provide. The twins were born on a stormy April morning, arriving 6 weeks early but healthy despite their prematurity. Davis came first, announcing his arrival with a lusty cry that belied his small size. Daniel followed 7 minutes later, quieter but equally determined. "They're fighters," the nurse assured Natalie as the boys were whisked away to the NICU. Small but mighty. Looking at her sons through the incubator walls, Natalie was struck by how much they resembled Grayson. The same determined set to their tiny jaws, the same intensity in their unfocused gaze. Davis had a small birthmark on his left shoulder, the only obvious physical difference between the identical twins. "Your husband must be so proud," another nurse commented as Natalie sat between the incubators, one hand reaching into each to touch her sons. "He's not in the picture," Natalie replied, the lie coming easier with practice. "I'm sorry," the nurse said, embarrassment coloring her tone. "I shouldn't have assumed." "It's all right," Natalie assured her. "We're going to be fine, the three of us." And somehow, against considerable odds, they were. The twins came home after 3 weeks in the NICU, tiny but thriving. Natalie established a routine of feeding, changing, sleeping when possible, and working from home to maintain her job at the research center. Elena proved an invaluable friend, offering advice from her own experience as a single mother, and occasionally watching the twins so Natalie could shower or run essential errands. The first year passed in a blur of milestones. First smiles, first teeth, first words, first steps. Davis was always slightly ahead, the more adventurous of the two, while Daniel observed carefully before attempting new skills. They were different in temperament but united in their bond, often communicating in what seemed like a private language only they understood. Natalie took thousands of photos, documenting every moment of their development. Sometimes, looking at these images, she would feel a pang of guilt that Grayson was missing all of this. But then she would remember the look on his face when she caught him with Vanessa, and the guilt would dissolve into renewed resolve. She was careful about her digital footprint, avoiding social media entirely and using cash whenever possible. She had no illusions about Grayson's resources. If he was truly determined to find her, he had the means to do so. But as months passed without any sign of him, she began to believe that perhaps he had accepted her disappearance, had moved on with his life as she was attempting to do with hers. By the twins' second birthday, Natalie had created a stable, if modest, life for her little family. She had been promoted at the research center, allowing them to move to a small house with a yard where the boys could play. They had traditions and routines, a community of friends, a sense of belonging in Pacific Grove that made New York feel like a distant dream. If you're raising children on your own, whether by choice or circumstance, give this video a thumbs up. The strength it takes to be both mother and father, to provide not just financially but emotionally for your children, is something only those who have walked that path can truly understand. It was a crisp autumn afternoon when Natalie's carefully constructed new life collided with the past she had fled. She was pushing the twins in their double stroller through the farmer's market, laughing at Daniel's attempt to pronounce pomegranate, when she felt it, that prickling awareness at the back of her neck, the sensation of being watched. She turned, scanning the crowd with the heightened alertness of a prey animal sensing a predator. And there he was, Grayson Cole, looking both familiar and foreign in casual clothes instead of his usual bespoke suits. His dark hair was longer than she remembered, his face leaner, but his eyes, those penetrating gray eyes that had once made her heart race, were fixed on her with an intensity that made her blood run cold. Then his gaze dropped to the stroller, to the identical faces of the twin boys with his strong jaw and her warm brown eyes, and his expression transformed into something Natalie couldn't read. Something between shock, wonder, and a terrible, dawning fury. "Twins," he said, the single word carrying the weight of 2 years of secrets and lies. Natalie instinctively stepped between him and the stroller. "You need to leave. They're mine." It wasn't a question. "They're mine," she corrected, her voice steady despite the earthquake happening inside her. "You lost any claim to them the moment I found you with my sister." People were beginning to stare, curious about the tension crackling between the beautiful young mother and the imposing man blocking her path. Grayson noticed too, his business instincts kicking in. Public scenes were bad for the Cole Industries brand. "We need to talk," he said, lowering his voice. "Privately. We have nothing to discuss." 2 years, Natalie. His voice was controlled, but she could hear the anger simmering beneath. 2 years you've kept my sons from me. Did you think I wouldn't find out? That I wouldn't come for them? Fear sliced through her. This was exactly what she had dreaded since the moment she'd seen those 2 heartbeats flickering on the ultrasound screen. Grayson Cole had built a business empire through ruthless determination and limitless resources. If he wanted something, he got it. And now he wanted his sons. "How did you find me?" she asked, buying time as she calculated escape routes. A muscle twitched in his jaw. "Does it matter? I'm here now." "Mommy." Davis's small voice broke the standoff. "Who's that man?" Grayson's eyes widened at being addressed as a stranger by his own child. Something flashed across his face. Pain, perhaps, or regret, before the mask of control slipped back into place. "An old friend of Mommy's," Natalie answered quickly, forcing a smile. "And we're done talking now. Say goodbye, boys." "Goodbye." The twins chorused obediently, waving small hands. Grayson didn't move from her path. "This isn't over, Natalie. Not by a long shot." "It was over the moment I walked into that office," she replied, her voice low enough that only he could hear. "Now get out of my way before I start screaming and create exactly the kind of scene Cole Industries PR team would hate to manage." For a moment she thought he might refuse. Then, with deliberate slowness, he stepped aside. "I'll be in touch. Soon." Natalie pushed the stroller past him, her heart hammering against her ribs, her legs threatening to give way beneath her. She didn't look back, didn't slow down until she had reached their small house 6 blocks away. Only then, with the door locked and the twins distracted by their favorite cartoon, did she allow herself to fall apart. Because she knew Grayson Cole, knew his determination and his resources. And she knew, with bone-deep certainty, that the battle for her children had just begun. If you believe that some mistakes can never be truly undone, that some betrayals cut too deep for forgiveness, hit that like button. And if you're wondering what happens when an unstoppable force meets an immovable object, when a billionaire's determination collides with a mother's fierce protection, subscribe to Timeless Love Tales with Mr. Harrison. The legal documents arrived 3 days later, delivered by a courier who looked uncomfortable handing over the thick envelope. Inside was a petition for paternity testing and shared custody, along with a personal note in Grayson's precise handwriting. "I've given you time to consider our situation rationally. My lawyer will contact yours to arrange the paternity test, though we both know what it will show. I have no desire to separate the boys from their mother, but make no mistake, I will be part of my sons' lives. The choice of how difficult this process becomes is entirely yours." Gee. Natalie read the note twice, her hands trembling with a mixture of fear and rage. The audacity of it, the cool presumption that she would simply acquiesce to his demands after what he had done. As if her disappearance had been an emotional overreaction rather than a desperate act of self-preservation. She called the only lawyer she knew in town, a woman who had helped with her name change and relocation when she first arrived in Pacific Grove. The news wasn't good. He's got the best family law team in the country, Miranda explained gently over coffee at her small office. And frankly, the courts don't look kindly on mothers who conceal children from their fathers, regardless of the circumstances that led to the separation. He cheated on me with my sister, Natalie said flatly, which makes him a terrible husband, but not necessarily an unfit father in the eyes of the law, especially given his resources and stability. So I just hand over my children to him? After everything, Miranda sighed. No, but you need to be strategic here. Fighting him outright could backfire spectacularly. He's not asking for full custody yet. He's asking for paternity confirmation and shared custody. That suggests he's willing to negotiate. Or it's just the opening move in a longer game, Natalie countered, remembering how Grayson approached business deals. Start with a reasonable request, then gradually increase demands until he had everything he wanted. That's possible, Miranda admitted. But running again isn't an option. He's found you once. He'll find you again. And next time, the courts will be even less sympathetic. After leaving the lawyer's office, Natalie walked to the beach, needing the calming presence of the ocean to clear her thoughts. The twins were with Elena for the afternoon, giving her rare solitude to process this new threat to their life. She sat on a driftwood log, watching the waves crash against the shore with relentless rhythm. How had Grayson found them? She had been so careful, using cash, avoiding social media, changing her name. Yet somehow, he had tracked them to this small coastal town thousands of miles from New York. And now he wanted his sons. The sons he hadn't known existed until 3 days ago. The sons who had never heard his name, never seen his face, never felt his embrace. What right did he have to suddenly appear and demand a place in their lives? But even as she asked the question, Natalie knew the answer. Biologically, legally, Grayson had rights as their father. Rights that no court would completely deny, regardless of his betrayal of their mother. The realization settled over her like a heavy blanket. She couldn't run again. She couldn't keep the twins from Grayson indefinitely. The only question was how to navigate this new reality in a way that protected her sons from the fallout of adult mistakes. That evening, after the twins were asleep, Natalie sat at her small kitchen table, watching them on the baby monitor. They slept as they always did. Davis sprawled across his bed like a starfish, Daniel curled on his side, one hand reaching toward his brother even in sleep. They were innocent in all of this, unaware of the complex emotions and history swirling around them. What would be best for them? To continue in their peaceful, stable life with just their mother? Or to know their father, to have access to his world of privilege and opportunity, despite the complications it would bring? Natalie had no easy answers, but she knew she couldn't make this decision based solely on her own hurt and anger. She had to think of Davis and Daniel, of their future, of what they would want when they were old enough to understand. The next morning, she called the number on Grayson's lawyer's business card. "I'll agree to the paternity test," she said without preamble when the attorney answered. "But I want a meeting with Grayson first. Alone. No lawyers, no witnesses. Just us." There was a pause. Then, "I'll convey your request to Mr. Cole." The meeting was arranged for the following evening at a neutral location, a private dining room in an upscale restaurant downtown. Natalie arranged for Elena to watch the twins, dressed in the most professional outfit she owned, a far cry from the designer clothes of her previous life, and arrived exactly on time. Grayson was already there, standing by the window overlooking the harbor. He turned when she entered, his expression carefully neutral, though his eyes moved over her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. "You look well," he said after a moment. "Let's skip the pleasantries," Natalie replied, remaining near the door. "I'm here to discuss our sons, nothing else." A flash of something, irritation, respect, crossed his face before he nodded. "Fair enough. Please sit." She took a seat at the far end of the table, maintaining as much distance as possible. "I've agreed to the paternity test, though we both know it's a formality. What I want to know is what happens next. What exactly are you expecting here?" Grayson sat across from her, his posture relaxed but his eyes alert. I want to know my sons, Natalie. I want to be their father, not just in name but in reality. I've missed 2 years of their lives already. I don't intend to miss any more. And Vanessa? What role do you envision for my sister in their lives? His expression hardened. Vanessa and I are not together, if that's what you're asking. We never were. Natalie laughed. A short, bitter sound. So what I walked in on was… What? A momentary lapse in judgment. It was a mistake, he said flatly. One I've regretted every day since. But this isn't about us, or what happened between us. It's about Davis and Daniel. The sound of their names on his lips sent a chill through her. You don't even know them. Because you didn't give me the chance? He countered, a hint of anger breaking through his controlled facade. You disappeared, Natalie. No note, no calls, nothing. I had no idea where you were, if you were safe. And all that time you were pregnant with my children. Children I had a right to know about. You forfeited that right when I found you with Vanessa. Did I? His voice was dangerously quiet now. Did one terrible mistake erase every legal and moral right I have to my own children? Because the courts won't see it that way, Natalie. And I think you know that. She did know it, and the knowledge sat like lead in her stomach. In the eyes of the law, Grayson's infidelity was irrelevant to his parental rights. His wealth, his stability, his army of lawyers. All of it gave him an advantage she couldn't hope to match. What do you want from me? She asked finally, hating the defeat in her voice. I want us to find a way forward, he said, his tone softening slightly. A way that allows both of us to be parents to our sons without putting them in the middle of a bitter legal battle. They deserve better than that. And if I refuse? If I fight you on this? Grayson's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes did. A flicker of the ruthless businessman who had built coal industries from the ground up. Then I'll use every resource at my disposal to secure my rights as their father. I don't want to do that, Natalie. But I will if I have to. The threat hung between them, unspoken but clear. He could outspend her, outlast her, wear her down through legal proceedings until she had nothing left. No money, no energy, perhaps not even her children. I need time, she said finally. Time to process this, to figure out how to explain it to the boys. They don't know you. They've never asked about their father because they're too young to understand what they're missing. You can't just walk into their lives and expect them to accept you overnight. Grayson studied her for a long moment, then nodded. A week. I'll give you a week to prepare them. Then I want to meet my sons, Natalie. Not as a stranger, but as their father. It wasn't enough time. How could any amount of time be enough to prepare 2-year-olds for such a monumental change? But it was all she was going to get, and they both knew it. 1 week, she agreed, rising from her chair. And Grayson, if you hurt them, if you use them as pawns in some game between us, I will never forgive you. And neither will they, once they're old enough to understand. His expression softened, showing a glimpse of the man she had once loved. I would never hurt them, Natalie. Whatever you think of me now, you have to believe that. She wanted to believe him. Part of her, the part that remembered how tenderly he had once held her, how passionately he had once spoken of wanting a family. Wanted to believe that he could be the father her sons deserved. But the other part, the part that had walked in on his betrayal, that had spent 2 years building a life without him, remained wary. We'll see, was all she said before walking out the door. The week passed in a blur of anxiety and preparation. How do you explain to 2-year-olds that the father they've never known is suddenly entering their lives? Natalie consulted child psychologists, read parenting books, and ultimately decided on a simple, age-appropriate approach. Remember how we read stories about families? She asked the twins as they sat on her lap for their bedtime story the night before Grayson was scheduled to visit. Some families have a mommy and a daddy who live together, and some have a mommy and daddy who live in different houses. Like Leo, Davis said, referring to a friend from their playgroup whose parents were divorced. That's right, like Leo, Natalie confirmed, her heart aching at how quickly they grasped the concept. Well, you have a daddy too. He's been away for a long time, but he wants to meet you now. Where was he? Daniel asked, his small brow furrowed in confusion. Natalie had prepared for this question, had rehearsed an answer that wouldn't demonize Grayson but wouldn't lie either. He was working far away, but now he's back, and he wants to know you both. Will he bring presents? Davis asked, practical as always. Despite her anxiety, Natalie smiled. I don't know, sweetheart. Maybe. But the important thing is that he wants to spend time with you, to get to know you. Does he like dinosaurs? Daniel wanted to know, clutching his beloved T-Rex plushie. You can ask him tomorrow when he visits, Natalie said, amazed at how easily children accepted new information, how adaptable they were compared to adults. That night, after the twins were asleep, she sat alone in her small living room, trying to prepare herself for Grayson's visit. She had insisted it take place at her house rather than his hotel or some public place. This was the twins' home, their safe space. If they were going to meet their father for the first time, it should be on familiar ground. When the doorbell rang precisely at the agreed-upon time the next morning, Natalie took a deep breath, checked that the twins were happily playing in the living room, and opened the door. Grayson stood there, looking uncharacteristically uncertain. In his hands was a large gift bag. I brought some things for them, he said, his voice slightly rough. Nothing extravagant. I asked my assistant to research what 2-year-old boys might like. The vulnerability in his expression caught Natalie off guard. This was not the confident, controlling CEO she had expected, but a nervous father about to meet his children for the first time. They're playing in the living room, she said, stepping back to let him in. I've told them a little about you, but they're 2. Their attention span is limited, and they might be shy at first. Grayson nodded, following her into the modest house. He looked out of place here, his expensive casual clothes and commanding presence at odds with the simple, homey surroundings. But when his gaze fell on the twins, everything else seemed to fade away. Davis and Daniel were building a tower with wooden blocks, their dark heads bent in concentration, their small hands working in the synchronized rhythm they often displayed. They looked up at the sound of footsteps, their identical faces curious but not alarmed by the stranger's presence. Boys, Natalie said, keeping her voice calm and positive. This is your daddy. He's come to meet you. Grayson crouched down to their level, his movements careful, as if approaching wild animals he didn't want to startle. Hello, Davis. Hello, Daniel, he said softly. I'm very happy to meet you. The twins looked at him with identical expressions of assessment, then glanced at their mother for reassurance. When Natalie nodded encouragingly, Davis, always the bolder of the two, spoke first. Are you really our daddy? Yes, Grayson answered, his voice steady despite the emotion Natalie could see in his eyes. I am. Where were you? Daniel asked, echoing his question from the night before. I was. Grayson hesitated, looking to Natalie for guidance. Working far away, she supplied, the agreed-upon explanation. Yes, he confirmed. But I'm here now, and I'd like to get to know you both. Would that be okay? The twins considered this with the serious deliberation they applied to all new situations. Then Davis pointed to the gift bag Grayson still held. What's in there? A smile broke across Grayson's face, relief evident in the relaxing of his shoulders. Some things I thought you might like. Would you like to see? Both boys nodded eagerly, their natural curiosity overcoming any lingering wariness. Grayson set the bag down between them and watched as they explored its contents. 2 identical stuffed dinosaurs, some picture books, and a set of wooden cars. Dinosaurs! Daniel exclaimed, clutching the plush T-Rex to his chest. How did you know? A lucky guess, Grayson said, his eyes meeting Natalie's briefly over the boys' heads. What followed was an hour of cautious interaction, the twins gradually warming to this new person in their lives, showing him their toys, their drawings, their small world. Grayson followed their lead with a patience Natalie had rarely seen from him, answering their endless questions, admiring their block constructions, reading when they brought him books, watching him with their sons, Natalie felt a confusing mixture of emotions. There was the expected anger and resentment, still raw despite the passage of time. But there was also an unexpected pang of something like regret. Not for leaving, but for the fact that circumstances had made leaving necessary. In another reality, one where trust hadn't been shattered, this scene of father and son's bonding would have been a joyful milestone rather than a complicated negotiation. "They're extraordinary," Grayson said quietly when the twins had finally tired of showing off and returned to their blocks. He and Natalie sat at the small kitchen table, watching the boys play. "You've done an amazing job with them." "They made it easy," Natalie replied. "They're good boys. They're happy, secure." His gaze remained on the twins, his expression thoughtful. "I was prepared for, I don't know, fear, confusion. But they're so well adjusted. Children are resilient when they feel safe and loved." Grayson nodded, then finally looked at her directly. "I want to be part of their lives, Natalie. Not just occasional visits or holidays. Real involvement." "And how exactly would that work? Your life is in New York. Ours is here." "I've been thinking about that." He leaned forward slightly, his voice low enough that the twins couldn't hear. "Cole Industries has been considering a West Coast headquarters for years. I could accelerate those plans, establish operations here." Natalie stared at him, taken aback by the scale of what he was suggesting. "You would relocate your entire company for this?" "For them." He glanced at the twins. "Yes," without hesitation. The conviction in his voice was unmistakable. This wasn't a negotiating tactic or a temporary concession. This was Grayson Cole, the man who had built an empire through sheer determination, applying that same focus to fatherhood. "What about Vanessa?" Natalie asked, the question that had been hovering between them since their reunion. A shadow crossed his face. "That ended the day you left. It was never." He paused, seeming to search for the right words. "It wasn't what you think. Not an affair, not a relationship. It was a mistake. A terrible, inexcusable mistake that cost me everything that mattered. You expect me to believe it was just one time? No, it wasn't just once." His honesty surprised her. "It happened 3 times over those 3 months. Always when I was working late, always when I was stressed about the Asian expansion." "I'm not offering excuses, Natalie. There is no excuse. But it wasn't an ongoing affair, and it certainly wasn't love. Does that make it better? No, nothing makes it better. I betrayed you in the worst possible way, with someone you trusted. I can't undo that. All I can do is try to be a better man now, for our sons." Natalie was silent for a long moment, watching the twins play. They had already accepted Grayson's presence with the easy adaptability of childhood, incorporating this new person into their world without the weight of history and betrayal that colored her own perspective. "I need to think about all this," she said finally. "About what arrangement would be best for Davis and Daniel." "Of course." Grayson stood, understanding that their time was up for today. "May I see them again tomorrow?" Natalie nodded. "They'll be expecting you now." "But Grayson, this doesn't mean I've forgiven you, or that I trust you." "I know." He looked at her with an intensity that reminded her of their early days together. "But I hope someday you might. Not for my sake, but for theirs. They deserve parents who can at least be civil to each other." After he left, after the twins had been put to bed with excited chatter about their new daddy and his promised return tomorrow, Natalie sat alone on her porch, watching the stars emerge over the Pacific. The day had gone better than she had feared, but had left her with more questions than answers. Could she truly co-parent with Grayson after everything that had happened? Could she set aside her own hurt and anger for the sake of her sons? And if Grayson did relocate to Pacific Grove, how would that change the delicate balance of the life she had built here? There were no easy answers, no clear path forward. But looking back at the house where her sons slept peacefully, Natalie knew one thing with certainty. Whatever happened next, whatever arrangement they eventually reached, her priority would remain the same. Davis and Daniel deserved the best of both their parents, deserved to grow up knowing they were loved unconditionally, regardless of the complicated history between the adults in their lives. The next morning, as she prepared breakfast for the twins, her phone chimed with a text from Grayson. "Thank you for yesterday, for giving me the chance to meet them. They're everything I could have hoped for and more. I'll be there at 10 as agreed." Reading the message, Natalie felt something shift inside her. Not forgiveness, not yet, but perhaps the first tentative step toward a new understanding. The man who had betrayed her 3 years ago and the father who had sat patiently building block towers with his sons yesterday were the same person, with all the complexity and contradiction that entailed. People could change. She had changed in these past 2 years, growing stronger, more resilient, more certain of her own worth. Perhaps Grayson had changed too. The shock of losing his family forcing him to confront parts of himself he had previously ignored. Only time would tell if that change was genuine and lasting. Only time would reveal whether they could build a new kind of relationship, not as husband and wife, but as parents committed to raising their sons with love and respect. As Davis and Daniel raced into the kitchen, chattering excitedly about seeing their daddy again, Natalie made a silent promise to herself and to them. She would approach this new chapter with caution but also with hope. Hope that from the ashes of betrayal, something valuable might yet emerge. Not the fairy tale she had once believed in, but something real and enduring, built on harder truths and deeper understanding. Because sometimes the most important journeys begin not with a single step, but with the courage to try again after falling. And sometimes the most meaningful relationships are not those that unfold perfectly from the start, but those that survive the harshest storms and emerge transformed on the other side. If this story resonated with you, if you believe in second chances but also in holding people accountable for their actions, hit that like button and subscribe to Timeless Love Tales with Mr. Harrison. Share your thoughts in the comments below about forgiveness, about co-parenting after betrayal, about what children truly need from the adults in their lives. Because in the end, the most powerful stories are those that remind us of our shared humanity, our capacity for both terrible mistakes and remarkable redemption. Remember, love isn't always a straight path. Sometimes it takes unexpected detours, painful lessons, and hard-won wisdom before we truly understand what matters most. And sometimes, the family we build isn't the one we initially imagined, but one that's stronger for having weathered life's most challenging storms. Until next time, this is Mr. Harrison, reminding you that every love story, even the most complicated ones, has something valuable to teach us about ourselves and the intricate, resilient nature of the human heart.